Tom, do you think the Ferguson police would have a strong case against the stepfather for inciting violence?
No, because I think they're going to have a hard time proving that somebody that heard him in the midst of all that noise actually went over and did an arson or, committed an act of starting a fire. I think that, most of those people that you see in that crowd are not watching CNN. They're not watching media reporting of him saying that. So it's probably a very few number of people that actually heard it at that time. The other argument being that I think many of the people that were there were bent on what they did from the beginning, with or without him inciting them. So I think the cause and effect of his words will be hard to prove.
Would it also be a factor in whether to go ahead with a charge against the stepfather, the anger that would generate, that there could be some violence as a result of that?
Well, I think that's a political question, but I think it's becoming unfortunate to me that criminal justice is based on whether people get angry if a charge is brought or angry if a charge isn't brought. We really have to investigate crimes. If a crime is committed, bring a prosecution. And I think that there's become so much politics on both sides of this issue that, I doubt he will be prosecuted, in my opinion.
Sonny, you probably know this. The lieutenant governor of Missouri, he's actually called for Head's arrest, saying he acted criminally that night. What do you think?
I agree with Tom. I think that would be a difficult case to prove. It's sort of that cause and effect that Tom referred to. I mean, how do you prove, really, if you're a prosecutor, that someone heard it and then reacted to that? But certainly, if you look just at the law, Wolf, and you look at whether or not he intended to cause a riot and then urged people to riot, urged people to burn property, the elements may be there, but very, very difficult to prove. And I just think any prosecutor that looks at a case like this, given, quite frankly, what is going on, what has gone on in Ferguson, would never touch this case. You'd have to be really tone deaf to the larger issues that are at play here to bring a case like that.
And Sonny, this is the same prosecutor who brought all that information before the grand jury that did not indict the police officer, right?
That's right. And again, I mean, the backlash would just be incredible. Of course, prosecutors are in the business of sending a message out to the community as to what will and will not be tolerated. But there is that prosecutorial discretion. And any prosecutor looking at something like this, I think would just, run in the other direction. It'd be a very difficult case to prove. And again, look at the climate here. I've got to tell you, when you look at the Ferguson police chief's actions, the fact that he's never reached out to the family, has never reached out to Michael Brown's mother, released that surveillance videotape, leaked it, and now is coming forward and saying this. There just really seems to be an agenda, and that's something that really shouldn't be tolerated from our police departments across the country.
Don, as you know, Michael Brown's mother has said that her husband, the stepfather of Michael Brown, that his comments were a result of deep anger, overwhelming frustration. I don't know if has he apologized, though? Have you heard a formal apology, any expression of regret, remorse by the stepfather?
I have not heard one personally, but according to his attorneys, according to Benjamin Crump, yes, there has been, he has expressed remorse for it. Again, I haven't heard it personally. But I mean, I think Sonny and I think Tom are right. Listen, as we look at fires, I'm just going to say it. Talk about throwing gasoline on a fire. Imagine the irony that the man who shot your son and killed your son is not charged, and then your husband or the stepfather is charged. People would be outraged. I'm not sure what would happen in that community. Anything can happen, but if anyone, I think they'd be really, really silly, quite honestly, to charge this man considering what's going on there. But again, to answer your question directly, I've heard from the attorneys that he's expressed remorse. I have not heard personally from him.
Well, it would be don't you think it would be a good idea for him, for example, to do an interview with you or me or somebody and to express that kind of regret?
It would. But think about it. Look how long it took Darren Wilson to come forward to do an interview. These are people, and his words were reprehensible. But I don't know how I would feel if a loved one had died. So I'll give him that. But his words were reprehensible. There's no excuse for it. Yes, he should probably come forward, but these are, as Jeffrey Toobin always says, ordinary people put in extraordinary circumstances. And he may not want to subject himself to the media circus, just like Darren Wilson didn't want to do it. So it would be great if he did it and he came and he apologized, but I'm not sure if he is the kind of person who wants to go under that type of scrutiny.